Over the past 4.5 decades, Stephen King, America's reigning master of horror, has written 60 novels, 5 nonfiction books, over 200 short stories, a smattering of screenplays, a handful of comic books, enough essays to fill a collection, and an episode of The X-Files. What have you been doing with your time? Even if you're a diehard Stephen King fan, this can all be a bit hard to keep up with. The dude's a machine, churning out best-selling material at a rate that can't even be matched by people half his age. He's a goddamn boss. But here's something you might not know, and here I'm specifically speaking to the casual Stephen King fans, not those of you who clear the board every time there's a Stephen King round at bar trivia. I know you folks know what's up. This one's for your neighbors.
How do sagas work, and how do we get to use them in our games to create the most epic of epicnesses ever? Well, let's jump right into it. So, sagas, the most important thing that we need to bear in mind with sagas is that they are in threes. Sagas come in threes. Anything more than a saga, when you start getting quadrilogies and you start getting even more than that, pentatrilogy, I don't even know what you would call it, a heptatrilogy. I mean, once you start over 3, you're really starting to milk it for all it's worth, and there hasn't been a lot of things that have worked very, very well. There have been some, admittedly, Harry Potter, for example, but generally speaking, they're not that engaging. We simply don't have enough material to keep them working. So, how do we work it out? It works in threes, and this is the way that it works. Each one of these is a campaign. Bear that in mind. Each one of these is a campaign. Now, if your campaign happens to run over 6 months, then you could, in theory, have a saga that runs out in a year and a half. If your campaign runs over a year, you've got 3 years worth of play. As long as your campaign is times by 3, that's how long your saga is going to be. There's a reason why it's called a saga and not just a campaign. It does help if you have crazy, crazy hair too, because it definitely is a campaign saga rather than just a campaign, because crazy hair is always indicative. So how does it work? What is our stock standard approach for a saga? Well, the Greek sagas that we look at, the Danish sagas that we look at, Beowulf, for example, the saga of Beowulf. When we look at sagas, they usually work in this cycle. And when you understand how the 1-2-1 act structure works, when you understand how narrative imperative works, you start to see why.
Okay, so obviously I love The Dark Tower. I'm a huge fan of Stephen King, and The Dark Tower is his biggest, craziest story ever. It's this creative buffet of King Arthur and Lord of the Rings, the American Western, and sci-fi, stocked with cyborgs and shootouts and haunted houses and actual Spider-Man, and a nutbag villain inspired by Robert Chambers and Robert Fripp. I mean, like I said, I love it. But what makes the series even more fun to me is how over time it drew in King's other stories, heroes and villains, places and concepts, all unifying in the shadow of the tower. Other videos have done a good job summing up those core connections. Check out the Birth Movies Death video I've linked below, and light a candle for Birth Movies Death. But I want to do things a little differently. I want to see how the Dark Tower universe grew over time, specifically how King wove together 13 elements like a seamstress at the loom or a spider at the branch. And I want to share that with you. So please, come along, because I think the journey through the Dark Tower universe is just as cool as the destination. It all starts in 1970. Stephen King attends a screening of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Along with the Robert Browning poem Child Roll Into the Dark Tower Came, it gives him the idea for the Dark Tower, this epic fantasy series about a cowboy knight questing for a mystical nexus of all existence. But the idea seems way too big this soon in his career, so King sets it aside. For now. A few years later, he writes the story of vampires overrunning a small town named Salem's Lot. Among the victims is a priest named Father Callahan. Remember that name. Following that, 2 Salem's Lot short stories. One for the Road explores the fallout from the novel, while Jerusalem's Lot explores the town's origins. Next, in Night Surf, beach-bound teenagers die of a superflu. And in Nona, police jail a teenage psychopath in a small town that King later names Castle Rock. Then survivors of that same superflu from Night Surf battle a wizard named Randall Flagg in the Stand. It's 1978 now, and King, emboldened by his success, releases chapters of The Dark Tower in magazines. The journey's officially begun. But Stephen King immediately returns to Castle Rock and a psychic assassin in the Dead Zone. And then grocery store customers fight off interdimensional monsters in the mist. That dimensional travel will become important. But back in Castle Rock, a St. Bernard terrorizes a mother and child. Then finally, 12 years after inception, King collects and publishes The Dark Tower, the Gunslinger, the first book to follow Roland, a hero who quests through the ruins of Midworld for the tidal tower. But then King goes back to Castle Rock again for 4 boys and a dead body, and also a truck that roars to hungry life, and also a car that takes supernatural shortcuts. But then King writes The Eyes of the Dragon, a fairy tale that definitely has Flag from the Stand and might be set in Roland's Midworld too. Put a pin in that. And also put a pin in his Peter Straub collaboration, The Talisman, where the heroes teleport into a fantasy land that also looks like Roland's universe. Anyway, back on Earth, a godlike turtle oversees the final battle with an interdimensional monster in It, which is set in a small town named Derry. And finally, 5 years after The Gunslinger, Stephen King publishes The Drawing of the Three, a sequel that name-checks heroes from The Eyes of the Dragon and Randall Flagg from The Stand, which means the Dark Tower universe isn't just advancing, it's expanding. But then King steps away again for the Tommyknockers, which features a character who makes a supply run through Derry. King also goes back to Castle Rock, where a ghostly pseudonym attacks the author who made him, and also a creepy camera takes pictures of an approaching bloodthirsty dog. Thankfully, King returns to the quest 4 years later as Roland and company journey through the Wastelands, where Roland mentions a godlike turtle named Maturin. Yep, the same turtle from It, which means the tower connects to the turtle and to the town of Derry. And then King returns to Castle Rock again, but this time he's closing shop with Needful Things, the last Castle Rock story, and thank God I was getting kinda sick of it. Fine, It Grows on You tracks a bizarre growing house also in Castle Rock. And back in that other town, an insomniac battles servants of a villain called the Crimson King, a strange creature who has deadly designs for Roland the Gunslinger. Oh, and also a woman escapes an abuser by transporting into Midworld. And 2 novels set in twin dimensions feature an interdimensional beast named Tak. In Everything's Eventual, a company forces a young man to commit psychic assassinations, hang on to that one, because 6 friggin' years after Wastelands, King finally publishes Wizard in Glass. In its pages, Roland sees the sigil of the Crimson King from Insomnia, and King tells us there are only 3 books left to write. Back on Earth, a book-writing widower travels through Derry and Castle Rock, which connects goddamn Castle Rock to the Dark Tower universe that never ends. Next, in Hearts in Atlantis, strange enemies named Lowmen chase after a powerful old psychic, while a rebel girl allies herself with Randall Flagg. And back in Derry, an author finds a supernatural painting with a monstrous car. And right when King feels the urge to return to the tower again, a car strikes him during his daily walk and nearly kills him. Yeah, right, like he'd let that stop him. Doped up on painkillers, King writes a Derry novel that's sort of like Aliens, but if the aliens skipped your chest and popped out of your ass. As King gets better, he and Peter Straub pit the heroes of the Talisman against the Crimson King in Midworld on behalf of captured psychics who are now called Breakers. And he also tosses out another supernatural car story, as a treat. Then King buckles down and focuses. He writes Wolves of the Calla, where Roland and his friends fight alongside Father Callahan, the priest from Salem's Lot. See? Told you to remember him. King also gives us a name for his version of interdimensional travel. He calls it going Todash. And in 2004, 34 years after first getting the idea, King finally completes his story with Song of Susanna and the Dark Tower. The core connections have been made, the author can rest, the tale is told. But the 13 elements persist, so let's wrap up. Standing stones in a main field struggle to contain a Todash monstrosity. A lowman retrieves a supernatural Kindle. An invisible Todash dome cuts off a small town. A pathetic man's wife dies unexceptionally in Castle Rock. A selfish man in Derry strikes a Faustian pact. A time-traveling teacher trying to save JFK stops through Derry. And finally, good lord, finally, we end the journey the way we started, with 3 small-town stories, this time in Castle Rock, but instead of a well-intentioned priest, we get our old buddy Randall Flagg. So, look, I know it can give you a headache trying to sort through all of this, and I try to limit my criteria. But I think there's also a generosity in how King rewards readers by revisiting classic characters, places, and ideas. It's a joy to see Beverly Marsh in 11/22/63, to see Ted Brodigan in the Dark Tower, to see new visions of Todash monstrosities, or to see Flagg change from a one-off boogeyman into a comment on cyclical violence. Because sure, the lines and circles here don't reflect the omniscient mastermind who had a grand plan, but I sometimes think grand plans are overrated, and this is something a little cooler, a writer who found his way through, making connections as he discovered them.
Oh, so you thought putting 27 movies in a timeline was hard? You ain't seen nothing yet. Today we're putting more than 60 films into one cohesive timeline, creating the Disney theory to end them all. Hello Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that always says, "Hey, theorists!" So, for as much as we get on them for the strange, often awful decisions they make, Disney has made a lot of great movies over the 100 years they've been around. Specifically, their animation is some of the most beloved in the world. There's a lot of genuine nostalgia for these stories, and I wondered, well, what if they were all part of the same story? What if there was one complete, cohesive Disney timeline of the Disney universe? The Disneyverse, if you will. Now, you may have seen this sort of idea around the internet before, specifically with the Pixar theory. This was a fun project originally created by John Negroni and picked up by fellow theorists like the Super Carlin brothers, trying to fit all of the Pixar movies into one complete timeline. It's a big challenge, and one that I really respect those creators for taking on. And I wanted to throw my hat into the ring with something similar. The Disney theory, doing the same thing with all of Disney's movies. Matt had previously connected a handful of Disney movies with cameos and Easter eggs, but I wanted to do them all, from Snow White to Moana 2. And it turned out much longer than I anticipated. Like, seriously, I was thinking this would be a special 25 to 30 minute video. And this turned into an epic that was over 45 minutes. So yeah, this is a multi-part series with part 2 coming by the end of the month. So, okay, how are we gonna be doing this? What are our rules? Like, most of Disney's movies are pretty ambiguous about when and where they take place, and putting them all together is gonna be a bit janky. But basically, we're going to be looking at all of the historical settings, landscapes, clothes, source material, cameos, and Easter eggs across all of the films to tie them together as best we can. And shoutouts to the awesome fan wikis and channel Mickeyology for being great resources for a lot of the information regarding all of that jazz. They were excellent starting points and just invaluable for us today. Regardless, the most important thing for us is to make sure that the main 62 films in the Disney canon fit in here. If you don't know, the Disney canon are the movies made specifically by Walt Disney Animation Studios. This is Disney's main animation studio that makes their tentpole, big-budget movies directly associated with the Disney brand. Just to be clear, that doesn't include other studios they've owned, the likes of Pixar or Blue Sky Studios or Image Movers or whatever. Like, those are their own things, and maybe we'll get to them someday. For the most part, it also doesn't include works from Disney Toon Studios or Disney Television Animation. Those were the people behind the direct-to-video sequels or animated series spin-offs for the main Disney canon. That being said, sometimes these sequels and spin-offs will have details that will help us definitively place the movies or support the world that we're building here. In those cases, we'll be using them, but we will make sure to call that out. But again, the most important thing for this theory is getting those main 62 films placed. Those extras are just a nice bonus if they fit in too. Oh, but with all of that done and dusted, loyal theorists, let's get right into the magic. Okay, so right off the bat, there's a common thread that ties all of the movies in the Disney canon together, and it's a sprinkling of that Disney magic. No, I mean literally, Disney magic. The thing that distinguishes this universe apart from ours is magic. Whether that be through talking animals or ghosts, or just straight up wizards. So the first thing to do here is figure out, where does that magic come from? Well, the answer is simple. Stars. I'm talking wishing stars, shooting stars, magic from the sun, which is just a big old star. For whatever reason, in the Disneyverse, stars are inherently magical and can pass that magic along to whatever they touch. And that is, well, everything. See, in the real world, everything is made of star stuff, elements that were first created inside of stars. The same thing is happening here, just with magic alongside the science. As the corniest song in Wish put it,
if you really want to know just who you are, you're a star.
We usually have an introduction of the heroes. This is your most vanilla epic campaign that you can run, if you like. The heroes get embroiled in some kind of battle, they save the day, they save the world, and all is right, or so it seems. Now, this is a very, very important period in our saga, because, and you're going to see a little bit later on why, I'm going to come back to it. The Nemesis victory. This is the second campaign. Once you have established that you are going to have a saga, and we're going to talk about how you establish that next slide, but once you've established that you're going to have a saga, this is what should happen next. The Nemesis should triumph. This is where the players have been struggling against that evil galactic overlord. They've been fighting against Cthulhu, and in this one, they defeated the priest who was summoning Cthulhu. They defeated the warlord and his massive, undefeatable starship. They defeated the dragon that was supposedly riling everybody up. In this campaign, series of adventures all linked together as you would under normal circumstances create a campaign. The nemesis wants something badly and is having difficulty getting it. In this one, we discover that there is a nemesis behind the one that the players defeated in this campaign. The nemesis is more powerful. The nemesis is more intelligent. The nemesis is stronger than the players ever thought they could possibly be. This one ends on a low note. It is at this point, this is the epic campaign that concludes with the players stuck in a different dimension and a cutaway to, and as your characters are frustrated for not being able to escape from this prison, without, the world burns, and the great kingdom of Evermore is no longer. It is trampled underneath the dark marched boots of the Imperial army that has now taken control over all that you had so valiantly fought to save before. And scene.
Let's go through some themes and techniques in Del Toro's world-building process. Maybe we'll get your creative juices flowing.
The Matrix is a system, Neo.
Step 1. There's geography, politics, religion maybe, technology and science, warfare, fashion, language, culture, art. So many things to research, learn, understand, before you can even begin to put together worlds. The larger and more complex the world, the more you need to know. You don't get points for making things more complex, but the setting must tie in with your story. Just adding detail for the sake of it is a waste of time and energy.
We are in a paradox where we have super sophisticated social language that makes it almost impossible to be imperfect. Racism, classism, brutal divisions through fear and hatred that you thought were dormant or gone for 50 years, they're coming back. So there's a paradox at play. And the only place that I think that the only place I find refuge and solace and forgiveness is in monsters.
Guillermo del Toro is extremely well-read and articulate. He spent 10 years practicing makeup, and at one point even owned a studio that did prosthetics and visual effects. On some movies, he is also credited in the production design. He's an accomplished artist in his own right. It has taken him his whole life to get to the point he is now, so I don't want you to start thinking world building on his level is easy. It's a good idea to start small, like he did in Chronos. Focus on doing one thing well first. Step 2. There are 2 ways to start world building. SimCity or Civilization is a good reference. You can either start with a few homes and grow out, or you can sit back, look at the map, and plan your city before you start building. I prefer the latter approach. It's called
Plan, but don't plan. Oh dear, what the hell does that mean? Plan, but don't plan? How is that useful?
This means you first decide on the overall story and themes. Why is this better? It will help you confine your research to what is actually required rather than spending endless days on researching things you might never need. It's easy to get lost in the details. The objects in his world appear used and damaged, an idea he religiously follows borrowed from Star Wars. Each thing is part of the larger puzzle, and there are no wasteful details that don't belong. The details can be just for one shot, like the kaiju bones at the beginning of Pacific Rim, but it tells a whole story and deepens our understanding of the setting.
The group would adopt the name the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. In 1700, the golden age of piracy began. This is almost right as the Renaissance ends. The era is defined by pirates being known as the true dominant force of the seas, so much so that the governments of the world would now fear these now legendary figures. In 1776, after decades of cultural divide,
while Castle Rock attempted to make all of King's stories work alongside one another, another film did its best to try and connect every existing film in King's filmography together. That film is The Dark Tower, and if you haven't seen it, well, I don't really blame you. It's a pretty run-of-the-mill fantasy film, not too bad, but nothing spectacular either. This film is loaded with Easter eggs and references to all of Stephen King's works, from a book actually written by Stephen King to the poster of Rita Hayworth from The Shawshank Redemption. The film almost faults itself on how much it tries to connect all of King's works. As you can probably already tell from this video, connecting all of the films together is a pretty difficult task, so you can imagine that a movie dedicated to trying to tie all these stories together while also telling its own story is a pretty tall order. This film touches on all the different aspects of King's works. The main character Jake has the ability to shine, though in this film it's referred to as the touch. Both Jake and the film's main antagonist, the Man in Black, played by Matthew McConaughey, have the ability to shine, and the Man in Black is, perhaps unintentionally, the figure that connects all of King's works together. The Man in Black has the ability to travel across time and parallel worlds, allowing him to pop up in many of King's different stories and subsequently films, even if his alternate identities aren't immediately brought up. While he has many different aliases, his most common alias is Randall Flagg, who you might have seen in The Stand. Man in Black pops up in many other shows and movies as well, though not all of his identities are confirmed. There's many different theories that pose the Man in Black as the antagonist in every single one of King's works. This would mean that Pennywise is actually the Man in Black, as well as El Cuco from The Outsider, and really any other of King's works that have a supernatural antagonist. While Randall Flagg or the Man in Black has only been on screen in a few different entries, this theory would suggest the Man in Black is in fact all of these different creatures. Will we ever have confirmation on this theory? I guess only time will tell.
So the idea is that the Nemesis wins here. The players are left with their characters in a predicament, locked away, defeated in some way. Now, there are some classic sagas that have played out and have used this model. I'm not going to go into them, but generally speaking, this is the darkest of the campaigns. It's the most difficult, and you have to have informed your players that they are playing in a saga in order for them not to end this campaign going, oh my god, this is so terrible. It's so bleak. It's so dark. I'm not happy. I'm going somewhere else. I want My Little Pony. I'm not going to be playing in this thing. No, done. Thanks. You must let them know that they're playing in a saga and that this is the cycle that they are in. Now, does that take agency away from them? Does that cause the players to go, oh, well, then, if you're just controlling the whole story, there was a point in playing? No, it doesn't. They're there for the journey, and they can influence it, and they should influence it. If we turn our attention, say, to one of the greatest sagas ever, labeled a trilogy, although it is technically a saga, if we look at the original Star Wars films, in the second one, The Empire Strikes Back, rated as one of the top films of all time, by the way, higher than its predecessor, A New Hope, Star Wars A New Hope, and its subsequent third film, Return of the Jedi, The Empire Strikes Back is where Darth Vader wins. Han Solo is frozen in carbonite. The rebellion is broken and scattered. There is animosity between everybody. We don't know how they could possibly succeed because they are at their lowest point. We loved it. Everybody loved it. It's not my personal favorite. My personal favorite is Return of the Jedi, but nonetheless, there we go. So it played out, and we were left for years, because films used to take much longer than you know, they would come out, but it took years before the third film came out, and we finally got our justice, where the heroes seemed to overcome tremendous odds, which were even bigger. And that leads us to our third campaign, the PC victory. Now, this one is the most challenging for you to operate as the game master. This one needs to go on a bigger scale than before. So if the PCs in the first one blew up a Death Star, in this one they can't blow up a Death Star because that's boring, we've done it already. Now they need to blow up a bigger Death Star whilst at the same time fighting the entire fleet of the Empire, as well as facing the Emperor in the Dark Tower with Darth Vader. Everyone's just got to come together, and it's got to be absolutely terrifying. So in other words, this one is the one where you need to pull out all the stops. So this battle was big and climatic at the end. This one needs to be even bigger and bolder. Again, look at the Avengers saga. We've had 3 of them, technically, and this is how they have run as well. There was a little fudging in the middle where the Nemesis seemed to have victory, or did they? No. The Avengers were scattered, fighting each other at each other's throats. And then we move into the final film, which needed 2 films in order to be told, which I loved it. No spoilers, don't worry. I loved it. It was ultimately, it got to this point because, well, they need to release more films. So we kind of knew where it was going. But this final battle was the biggest battle in the history of cinema making.
Why? Again, repetition. But it's not the what, but the how of the repetition that matters.
Yes, girlie. Now, make a wish. And take a bite.
I grew up around fables and classic fairy tales, which, in retrospect, were quite long and convoluted. But I still recall most of them in detail.
Now take the apple, dearie. And make a wish.
Because of this magical number.
Fine, fine. Now take a bite.
Cinderella visits the ball and dances with the prince 3 times. Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother lives in a house under 3 oak trees. Sleeping Beauty has 3 fairies by her side. And 3 little pigs, well, 3 little pigs. The reason why so many classic fairy tales have things repeated 3 times is because 3 is a number that resolves. When something happens twice, we notice a pattern. But when something happens thrice, we confirm the pattern, a resolution. Pan's Labyrinth 2 is a fairy tale at its core, albeit a dark one. And so Guillermo del Toro embeds the rule of 3 within the film's complicated structure to unify the stories, the perspectives, and the themes into a coherent assemblage.
Believe me, I wanted to scrap this video and work on something else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there must be something somewhere out there that gives us just another glimpse of this behind-the-scenes metaverse world. So I kept searching. And searching and searching and searching everywhere I could think of. The Pixar Wikipedia, the Disney Plus spin-offs and short films. I even watched fucking Mater's Tall Tales, and there was still nothing I could use. But then I realized I was looking in the wrong place. Pixar always re-releases their movies on DVD, and a lot of these DVDs have special features and bonus content like creator interviews, deleted scenes, old promotional material, and most importantly, the blooper segments. If there's more metaverse content out there, I bet you it's on these DVDs. So I bought as many DVDs as I could find and started looking through every single menu item until I found a little something called character interviews.
That's beside the point. So 3s, you've got to work in 3s. I need to speed up. Okay, so bigger. Every time it's a step up. Every time it's a step up. Every time it's bigger. Bigger setting. Bigger odds. Smaller relationships. What do I mean by this? The setting needs to be bigger. So in the first one, where we are just introducing the characters to the world, to the players, the characters being introduced to the players, they're discovering who they are, they're learning about them, they're leveling up, they're powering up, they're earning their pips, they're whatever your system has for advancement. They're getting into the world. The next one has to be bigger. So now the little kingdom that they were in, now they're starting to fight in kingdoms around. Or it's not just this galaxy, it's the entire universe. Because in the third one, it's not just the universe, it's the multiverse. So we need to always get bigger. The odds need to get bigger. The first one, it's a small singular location. When we look again to Star Wars, they had to simply blow up one Death Star. They weren't fighting the entire Empire. It was just a Death Star that they needed to blow up. If we look at the Aliens trilogy, the first 3 anyway, before they brought out the 4th one, although the 4th one does make it a rather complete saga, but if we look at the Aliens trilogy, the first one was fighting one alien in a starship with fairly unprepared crew. The second one was fighting hundreds of aliens all over the place and making it so much darker because now we realize that the corporation Wayland Yutani was evil and was just trying to get these things for warfare.
But I mean, do you think it's any coincidence that this guy looks like an agent from The Matrix?
Coincidence? I think not!
Exactly, Bernie, you get it!
This also explains why the toy actors need to eat.
I had that bean burrito for lunch.
It's because they're not really toys. Sure, they actually look like them on the outside, but they probably have internal organs and all the same basic needs as any living thing. Okay, fine. But Why do the actors in the metaverse still call themselves by their character names, even out of character?
Woody!
My name is Fleck.
Oh, come on, Buzz! You're right, Woody.
Well, if we're going off of Toy Story logic, when the actors are created, I think they're also given the same beliefs and personality of whatever character they're supposed to represent. It's like in Toy Story 1 when Buzz literally thought he was a real human space ranger despite being a tiny toy.
I'm Buzz Lightyear, Space Ranger, Universe Protection Unit.
You actually think you're the Buzz Lightyear?
It's because he was made to be that character. In fact, this is probably also why Bullseye or the Queen's Aphid, two characters that are meant to be just regular, non-speaking animal pets.
Bullseye, go, 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 go.
Isn't that right, Aphid? Oh, you're such a cute little Aphid.
Still act like pets even when they aren't filming.
Hey, boy! No, down, Bullseye! Whoa, Bullseye! Stop, horsey, whoa!
Uh-oh. Towel! I need a towel over here!
It's because this is the belief they were imbued with. And it makes sense because, you know, if you believe you are a character, you're gonna give the most believable performance. Okay, but here's a tough one. How come the bird from A Bug's Life was actually a fake animatronic robot? You know, if Pixar can easily bring to life any animated character they want, why bother building a robot for this scene? Doesn't this kind of disprove my whole theory? Actually, it helps prove it. In A Bug's Life, this bird is a regular, unintelligent, wild bird. All it does throughout the entire movie is just mindlessly attack other bug characters. So, if Pixar was to actually bring this bird to life, it would always have the belief that it's just a mindless wild bird that wants to eat bugs all the time, even when they aren't filming, just like Bullseye or the Aphid, which would obviously be way too dangerous for a film set full of bug characters, hence why they have a fake animatronic bird instead. Starting to all kind of make sense, isn't it? What else do we got? Why are the sizes of the toys, bugs, and monsters all so inconsistent in the bloopers? Well, if Pixar can create life in any form they choose, there's nothing stopping them from just creating an extra small or extra big copy of a character. In fact, we already know Pixar sometimes makes many copies of the same character.
I can't believe that's the fifth time. What role is that guy in?
And the two instances where we see these size differences are both jokes that rely on the characters being way too big or small.
Hey, Ted! Good morning!
The gag just wouldn't work if they were all the same size. So yeah, I think Pixar just created extra small Bugs Life characters or an extra big Rex just for this one gag. Or honestly, this is probably just the same giant Rex from the opening of Toy Story 3. Alright, cool. So this theory seems to fix a lot of the weird, small contradictions in the bloopers.
Then we go to the third one. Now, the third one was the darkest of them. It was in a prison situation, but there was ultimate victory at the ultimate cost. Then they brought in the fourth one, which, although it is part of the entire series, they tried to ramp up. They tried to make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And although the budget was bigger for the fourth film, did they ramp up the odds? Some might say yes, some might say no. I say no. I felt that it was just a rehash, a very pretty rehash, entertaining nonetheless, but it didn't kind of take us anywhere new. So the first three certainly did that. But the relationships need to be smaller. So as you advance, as your campaign turns into a saga, the relationships with the NPCs need to get smaller. And by smaller, I don't mean less. By smaller, I mean more intimate. But I didn't want to write intimate there. So I mean that the groups that are involved in this process are intimately involved. So it's not just a case of, hello, Bob the blacksmith. It's, hello, Bob, how is your wife? How is your child? We develop those relationships so that the NPCs move forward. Look at how Lando Calrissian in the Star Wars films went from being just the swindler to being important. Now, when we look at all 6 films, supposedly when you put them all together, he's now supposedly back in this last one. Certainly the trailer would indicate that. So we now see this journey of the NPCs as they grow and evolve. And they grow and they evolve in the relationships that are formed between the PCs and the NPCs. You must work on your NPC relationship. Even if your PCs, if your players are not the kind that really get involved with the NPCs, work on it. Drive it forward. Yes, you have to have big set pieces, you have to have big battles, you have to have big staging, but work on those smaller relationships, and it will make the entire story feel bigger, because now it's not just the PCs who are invested. It's the PCs plus the NPCs that they have fallen in love with that are now involved and invested. So we need to do that.
Alright, make sure the polarity is reversed. The anomaly detector is set to 0. Don't want to set that to 1 like last time. That was bad. Okay, no time like the present. 3, 2, 1. Oh, okay, no, it's working this time. It's getting really hot. That bright white light. Oh, is my skin?
And here is where we get to the most pivotal point in the early Disneyverse, the year 7000 BC and the fall of Atlantis, as seen in that movie's prologue. Using their magically fueled technology, Atlantis accidentally nuked to the whole planet and created a giant tidal wave. Whoopsie! This led to the sinking of Atlantis and a great flood that hit the entire planet, as referenced by Milo and Kida later in the movie.
Such knowledge has been lost to us since the time of the Maybermock.
Oh, the Great Flood.
This is also where the Noah's Ark sequence from Fantasia 2000 would fit in, where we see Noah save the animals and ferry them to the only sliver of land that's not completely submerged. So that's good news for Noah and his animals, but what about the rest of humanity? Kind of hard to come back from the whole world getting flooded, isn't it? Well, thankfully, there were parts of civilization like Avalonia from Strange World that were able to survive on the backs of giant turtles. Yeah, really. These were likely created by the magic that brought back life after the dinosaurs, and we see in Strange World that they're using the flooded planet as their own personal swimming pool. And believe it or not, but this isn't even the only example of this we see in the Disney canon. In the direct-to-video sequel Aladdin and the King of Thieves, the gang discover the remnants of an ancient civilization built on the back of a giant turtle. Sound familiar? That's just further proof that humans were forced to resettle on the backs of these giant turtles until the continents re-emerged. Oh, and just as a little bonus here, we actually have a direct connection between Atlantis and Strange World. We see an Atlantean book written in its distinctive language at the end of Strange World, suggesting that the fall of Atlantis was studied by the surviving humans. However, eventually Avalonia would have been flooded again as the giant turtles died, or just decided to go back underwater. They got a little divine intervention from some very powerful individuals, thus beginning Disney's Age of the Gods. Yeah, at this point, higher powers swoop in to reshape the world and fix the mess left behind by Atlantis. The first to step up is Tafiti, who raised the land from the ocean and unflooded the planet.
In the beginning, there was only ocean, until the mother island emerged.
But Tafiti was only one such powerful being. There were others, including the Titans and other giant monsters like Tamatoa, who brought chaos to the world, earthquakes and volcanoes that never slept. Enter other pantheons like the Greek gods, who imprisoned the Titans and monsters beneath the seas to help humanity thrive. These prisons became small worlds unto themselves, like Lalotai in Moana, and Wonderland in Alice in Wonderland. Even some powerful mortal sorcerers were imprisoned in similar worlds or trapped in items like cauldrons.
The God's spirit, since no prison could hold him, he was thrown alive into a crucible of molten iron.
Dang, man, Zeus don't mess around. Regardless, only creatures that could feasibly coexist with humans were allowed to hang around. Dragons and mermaids were left off the hook, as were certain demigods like Maui, who set humanity up for success by taming nature. Speaking of demigods, this actually leads us to the story of Hercules, set in 1000 BC. We know this thanks to a date we can see on a credit card in the movie. Guess all that wish magic also got capitalism a jumpstart in this timeline. This film also shows us that gods are still running the show, since we see the Greek pantheon and Hercules almost ascend to become one of them. Oh, and just before we move on, Hercules also lets us place the Lion King and all of its ancestor star magic roughly at the same time. See, one of the famous labors of Hercules in Greek myth to prove that he was a hero was killing the Nemean lion, a beast that was terrorizing the town of Nemea. Well, in the Disney movie, we see Hercules wearing a lion pelt that is identical to Scar. So somehow, Scar survived being attacked by the hyenas, and the Lion King made his way up to Greece and was eventually defeated by Hercules. And just to get it out of the way, yes, the Timon and Pumbaa series features those two in the modern day, but those aren't the same Timon and Pumbaa from the movie universe. Timon in the films has 5 stripes on his back, but only 3 in the show, so it's non-canon or some weird alternate universe. But enough about that, let's get back to the Disney gods. Something happened that drove the gods away, or made them take a hands-off approach moving forward, and that thing was the Droon from Raya and the Last Dragon. In the year 800 800 BC, dark entities known as the Droon spread across the world with the power to turn any creature into stone. And though you might not be able to kill a god, you can trap them forever on a rock. So how can we put this at 800 BC? Well, we know that the Droon rose to power 500 years before the main events of Raya.
Well, that all began 500 years ago.
And given the presence of iron weapons and crossbows in the main story, we can estimate that Raya is set around 300 BC, so 500 years before that would make this 800 BC. Regardless, after the gods left, magical beings called dragons defeated the Droon in the fictional Southeast Asian subcontinent of Kumandra, though they were themselves trapped in stone. 500 years later, the Droon were released once again during the main events of Raya before being defeated once and for all. With the Droon finally gone for good, humanity once again thrives, though Polynesia suffers after the demigod Maui steals the heart of Te Fiti and triggers a slowly encroaching wave of darkness that drains life from the islands across the Pacific. Don't worry, we'll get back to that story shortly, but first we have to take a brief pit stop in Europe. Here we have the Black Cauldron. Yeah, I bet you forgot about this one. Honestly, I thought that this one was going to be a challenge since it takes place in a fantasy world known as Prydain, until I dug into it and discovered that Prydain is just another name for the country of Wales in Great Britain, thus setting it firmly on Earth. Anyway, this film has to take place around the 500s AD since the helmet that Taran imagines himself wearing resembles a Spangen helm, a real type of helmet popular during this century. Likewise, this leads us directly into the Sword in the Stone, set just a slight jaunt away in 500s England. Here, King Arthur rises to power to become a legendary hero under the tutelage of the mage Merlin. This is the date range typically given for Arthurian legend, which more or less lines up with what we see in the film. We're also going to set the famous Sorcerer's Apprentice story from Fantasia here, which sees the sorcerer Yen Sid and his apprentice, a strange humanoid mouse creature named Mickey. These animal-human hybrids will become much more common later on in the timeline and are likely the result of star magic really fast-tracking evolution of other species. Anyway, we're placing this here because of the similarity between Yen Sid and Merlin's attire, and the similar use of magic. That's not to say they're the same character, but they are clearly peers. And now, back to the Pacific to round out the first millennium. We have Moana and Moana 2. These are set in Polynesia during the 900s, and we can chalk this date up to some real-world history. See, Moana's story unfolds during a period called the Long Pause. This was a time when the exploration of the ocean by the Polynesian peoples stalled for over 1,000 years and ended in the 10th century. Well, in the Disneyverse, this came to an end thanks to Moana's adventure to Te Fiti, which reignites the desire to explore in her people.
How am I supposed to make a theory about this? I've looked through every possible avenue for more metaverse content and only found more contradictions. Look, obviously Pixar puts a lot of time and effort into the world building of these award-winning animated movies, but clearly they don't give a fuck about these bonus behind-the-scenes clips. There's no theory here. I give up. I'm sorry. I can't. But then, right when I was about to record this video, I felt a little itch in the back of my head. The same itch you get when you look at bad mocap animation or an unlicensed knockoff of a popular character. The kind of itch that tells you there's something off here. That behind the laughter and the kooky hijinks is something profoundly wrong. So I rewatched the bloopers over and over again. For weeks I couldn't sleep without thinking about these damn bloopers. And then one day I finally realized what it was that was bothering me so much.
Fish! Ah!
However, there must be restraint.
Huge for our Disney timeline. First up, we have The Emperor's New Groove, set in Peru during the era of the Incan Empire, so we're gonna plop this one in the early 1400s. We also get another example of magic in this world transforming a human into an animal, which is just very much a recurring theme in the Disneyverse.
That's something that's very important. Do not force it. It says there, don't force. Don't force it. Do not force a saga on your players. It might sound like something that you really want to do, and it is an amazing feat to achieve if you can run a saga. But don't force it.
Death is the ultimate human imperfection. Guillermo's films always emphasize the beauty of life through its transience. In Kronos, the immortal man gives up his eternal youth and accepts his mortality after realizing that it's death that makes life valuable. In Pan's Labyrinth, Ophelia's death is depicted not as a tragedy, but an eternal respite from the pain of reality. Even in Pinocchio, his immortal state is portrayed more as a curse than a blessing, and the audience is constantly reminded of the unbreakable cycle of life, that our existence is only relevant and worthwhile because it ends.
The one thing that makes human life precious and meaningful, you see, is how brief it is.
The repeated images of different timepieces found in these films can be taken as visual representations of our impermanence. Fittingly, they are found in the film's most pivotal moments, either as a simple reminder of the characters' temporality, as a reflection of their determination to accept their mortality, or as a visualization of time itself. Sometimes we feel as if we have too little, and at other times, too much.
I don't care! Send me back!
So those are, in my opinion, how you run sagas and how you make sagas interesting, how you bring them to life so that people go, I want that. That's what I want. They're an incredible challenge to run, and if you do pull them off, you will certainly be a great GM, for there is no greater the reward than stringing 3 epic campaigns together to create this saga where the characters have gone on this huge journey and have come out at the other end, sometimes dead, sometimes alive, most certainly changed. Well, there's no greater glory than that.
Get ready. This is the Pixar Metaverse Theory. The theory, sorry. What did I say? I said Siri?
Alright, let's roll again. And action.
Whoa!
Can we use that one? Okay, everyone back to 1.
Is a sneaky little reference to the fact that the director of Up is also named Alex. Oh, wait. Oh, I said Alex? No, let's go again. Woody shows up as a crew member on A Bug's Life. The bugs show up as Toy Story. Excuse me, can I help you, Goose? Get out of here. And why is Rex so big compared to the monsters? Monsters are Hey, why is everyone laughing? What? Oh. Who did this? Which one of you guys did this?
Cool, yeah. Did we get it? We're all done? Awesome.
Please help me! I'm a prisoner here. They're forcing me to do this. Please help!